Assalamualaikum dan salam sejahtera. Anda bersama saya Nina Rozman dalam Niaga Awani. Seperti biasa dalam segmen ini kami akan bawakan perkembangan terkini niaga dan ekonomi dari tempatan hingga ke antarabangsa. Setentu antara laporan pertama yang akan kami mulakan dengan TVET Madani dengan pendidikan dan latihan teknikal dan vocational. TVET merupakan laluan alternatif bagi seseorang pelajar meningkatkan kebolehan dalam pasaran pekerjaan. Menurut Timbalan Menteri Sumber Manusia Mustafa Sakmud, bagi golongan lepas SPM khususnya, skim TVET Madani yang dilancarkan turut menawarkan khidmat nasihat serta bantuan kewangan terutamanya buat golongan B40.
Mungkin ada di antara mereka ini golongan B40. Jadi kita akan bagi khidmat nasihat kita mana yang sesuai, dan jika mereka ada masalah untuk membayar contohnya iuran pendaftaran ataupun masalah kos yang berkaitan.
Menurut Mustafa lagi, usaha jangka panjang ini juga bertujuan mengurangkan kebergantungan negara terhadap pekerja asing. Ini kerana segala program yang diatur akan turut disertai dengan insentif seperti allowance sepanjang pengajian serta allowance latihan industri.
Mereka masuk semuanya percuma. Malah mereka dibayar allowance sebulan RM100. Dan kalau mereka pergi internship, mereka akan dibayar RM300 daripada ILP. Jadi yang pentingnya kita skim TVET Madani untuk memudahkan saja mereka masuk.
Beliau berkata demikian ketika ditemui selepas menyempurnakan Majlis Anugerah Pelajar Cemerlang Madani Parlimen Sepanggar di Institut Latihan Perindustrian Kota Kinabalu di Sepanggar pada Rabu.
Baik, kita tahu indeks harga pengeluar IHP akan diterbitkan oleh Jabatan Perangkat Malaysia Dawsum hari ini. Sudah tentu ada banyak iaitu pandangan mengatakan adakah kadar inflasi akan naik lagi pada bulan Mei ataupun terus dikekal, dan sekarang ini kita akan reflect balik untuk inflasi, keadaan inflasi sebelum ini dan apakah unjuran yang kita akan jangka yang menjadi penyumbang kepada kadar inflasi kita untuk hari ini. Sudah tentu kita akan bawakan penganalisis tamu kita yang sudah bersedia dalam Google Meet iaitu Abdul Muiz Morhalim, merupakan pakar ekonomi MIDF Research. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih Muiz. Sudah tentu ini adalah hari yang kita boleh cakap berdebar-debar untuk kita mendapatkan iaitu indeks IHP sekaligus mendapatkan angka inflasi. Sehingga bulan April 2023 Muiz, inflasi terus menyederhana kepada 3.3%, lebih perlahan berbanding 4.7% yang dicatat Ogos tahun lalu. Melihat kepada survei pasaran yang dibuat oleh Bloomberg sendiri secara purata, para penganalisa di pasaran mereka memberi jangkaan mereka unjur inflasi pada bulan Mei yang akan dikeluarkan iaitu Dawsum hari ini akan terus menjederhana iaitu sekitar 3%. Jadi mungkin itu adalah daripada Bloomberg. Adakah ini selari dengan jangkaan MIDF Research?
Okey, terima kasih kerana beri saya peluang untuk berkongsi pendapat. Ya, secara kasar memang kami setuju trend baca inflasi kita nampak akan terus lebih sederhana. Kerana kalau kita lihat dari segi paras harga komoditi, contohnya harga minyak mentah Brent yang kini berada di paras bawah $80 setong berbanding sekitar $100 setong tahun lalu. Dan harga minyak sawit mentah juga kalau kita lihat sekarang ni berada dalam sekitar RM3,500 ke RM3,600 setan, dan berbanding lebih daripada RM6,300, RM6,400 pada 12 bulan yang lalu. Jadi memang kalau dari segi jangkaan kami juga berpendapat inflasi mungkin akan terus menjadi sekitar 3% pada bulan Mei. Cuma dari segi komponen, kita dapati sebenarnya kedua-dua komponen utama iaitu harga makanan juga harga selain daripada makanan menunjukkan trend yang lebih sederhana, cuma berbanding antara harga makanan dan harga bukan makanan. Harga makanan sebenarnya adalah menjadi satu faktor utama yang pada saya agak membimbangkan kerana kita lihat dari segi tekanan inflasi, harga makanan ini berada pada purata 6.7% pada 4 bulan tahun ini, iaitu 2 kali ganda lebih tinggi. Selain daripada itu, komponen lain yang turut mencatatkan inflasi yang tinggi ialah hotel dan restoran yang mana kadarnya lebih kurang 7% dalam tempoh 4 bulan tahun ini. Jadi ini antara faktor yang pada saya kira perlu kita beri perhatian lah.
Baik, itu adalah antara yang kita perlu beri perhatian. Jadi sekiranya inflasi kekal tinggi, Adakah kita akan menyaksikan satu lagi pengumuman kenaikan kadar faedah OPR oleh Bank Negara pada mesyuarat dasar moneteri pada bulan hadapan dengan mengambil kira-kira faktor yang telah dikongsikan oleh Muiz sebentar tadi?
Okey, kalau dalam untuk membuat keputusan perubahan OPR ataupun dasar moneteri, dari segi mandat kita lihat sebenarnya Bank Negara dijangka akan memberi fokus kepada dua faktor utama, iaitu pertumbuhan ekonomi secara makro, iaitu melihat kepada kestabilan ekonomi, dan yang keduanya ialah daripada segi kestabilan harga, yang mana khususnya jika tekanan harga itu berpunca daripada permintaan yang kuat, ini memberi dorongan ataupun peluang bagi Bank Negara untuk terus menaikkan OPR. Memang kalau kita lihat dari segi contohnya pertumbuhan perbelanjaan runcit, kita dapati pertumbuhan masih kekal pada paras 2 digit yang telah dicatat secara 15 bulan secara berturut-turut sehingga ke bulan April. Dan ini menggambarkan dari segi tekanan permintaan ke atas harga juga menunjukkan paras yang tinggi kerana dari segi inflasi teras ataupun core inflation yang berada lebih tinggi daripada inflasi keseluruhan. Dan kalau kita ambil kira dari segi dua faktor ini, pertumbuhan ekonomi yang lebih baik dan juga kestabilan perbelanjaan, ada kemungkinan Bank Negara akan menaikkan lagi OPR sebanyak 25 mata asas pada mesyuarat di bulan hadapan. Cuma kalau kita lihat dari segi trend inflasi yang lebih sederhana dan sekiranya data inflasi yang dikeluarkan pada hari ini menunjukkan penurunan yang lebih cepat, saya kira mungkin kemungkinan kenaikan OPR itu adalah lebih rendah.
Baik, kita nak tengok juga kepada aspek ringgit yang juga memberi kesan kepada inflasi ini. Semakin hari, ramai yang kita boleh cakapkan semakin bimbang melihat kejatuhan nilai ringgit yang mencecah RM4.65 semalam berbanding dolar Amerika. Ada yang mengaitkannya dengan suasana ekonomi negara yang tidak memberangsangkan. Jadi mungkin Muiz boleh kongsikan bagaimanakah pendapat Muiz mengenai penyusutan nilai ringgit dan kesannya kepada inflasi, terutamanya mungkin boleh kongsikan ada yang memikirkan suasana ekonomi tidak memberangsangkan. Mungkin ada terdapat sektor-sektor yang mengalami penyusutan. Bagaimana Muiz?
Okey, kalau kita lihat dari segi kelemahan nilai ringgit ini memang ada dua pendapat lah. Pertama, sama ada ini menggambarkan suasana ekonomi yang lemah ataupun sebenarnya ianya lebih terkesan daripada perkembangan di luar negara. Tapi kalau kita lihat dari segi data, pertumbuhan ekonomi sebenarnya nampak lebih stabil, masih terus dijangkakan kekal mampan. Jadi kemungkinan besar adalah kebimbangan itu lebih menjurus kepada perubahan yang berlaku di luar negara. Kerana kita dapati juga dari segi prestasi perdagangan luar negara mencatatkan pertumbuhan yang lebih rendah pada bulan April, dan pada bulan Mei terdapat peningkatan walaupun masih mencatatkan penurunan, tapi ia tidaklah menurun sebanyak yang kita alami pada bulan April. Tetapi secara kasarnya terdapat kebimbangan dari segi apa yang berlaku di luar negara, termasuk juga kenaikan kadar faedah di Amerika Syarikat, yang mana Federal Reserve dijangka akan terus menaikkan kadar faedahnya kepada paras yang lebih tinggi, dan ini menjadi punca kenapa aliran keluar dana daripada pasaran negara kepada keluar negara, dan ini menyebabkan kepada kelemahan nilai ringgit. Cuma kalau kita bandingkan antara pergerakan nilai ringgit dan juga inflasi, ianya mengambil kira faktor-faktor lain. Sebab kalau kita lihat contohnya ringgit sekarang ini berada pada paras RM4.65, iaitu lebih kurang sama dengan paras yang dicatat pada bulan November tahun lalu. Dan ya, kita lihat paras inflasi juga telah mula menurun pada bulan November tahun lalu. Ini bermakna pergerakan inflasi itu bukanlah hanya disebabkan pergerakan nilai ringgit. Cuma seperti yang saya katakan tadi, antara faktor yang menjadi kebimbangan ialah dari segi sektor makanan ataupun harga makanan, kerana kebergantungan kepada sumber luar ini termasuk mengambil kira kelemahan nilai ringgit mungkin akan menyebabkan harga makanan akan terus kekal tinggi dan menyumbang kepada tekanan inflasi secara keseluruhannya.
Baik, seperti yang Muiz cakap tadi, ringgit yang melemah ni adalah antara dua sebab faktor ada disebabkan pertumbuhan ataupun keadaan ekonomi ketika itu, dan juga yang kedua adalah disebabkan faktor luaran, apa yang berlaku di luar negara. Tetapi seperti yang saya bincangkan dengan Muiz dan pakar-pakar penganalisis lain, mereka berkata memang ada faktor dalaman dan luaran, ini tidak dapat dielakkan, namun faktor luaran agak susah sikit untuk dikendalikan berbanding faktor dalaman kerana ia di luar kita punya iaitu aspek. Jadi mungkin ini adalah disebabkan ada juga yang menyalahkan Bank Negara kerana tidak bertindak untuk menyokong mata wang negara daripada terus melemah. Adakah benar tiada campur tangan Bank Negara untuk menstabilkan nilai ringgit ini, dan adakah ini juga tindakan tepat bagi kita memastikan inflasi terkawal, Muiz?
Okey, kalau kita lihat dari segi mesej yang disampaikan oleh Bank Negara, sebenarnya terdapat tindakan ataupun intervention yang dibuat. Cuma ianya lebih bertujuan untuk mengurangkan perubahan ataupun pergerakan nilai ringgit yang secara drastik. Tapi dari segi target ataupun nilai tertentu, saya percaya seperti apa yang Bank Negara katakan, tiada satu-satu tahap ataupun nilai yang menjadi target yang ditetapkan oleh Bank Negara. Oleh sebab itu kita dapati pergerakan nilai ringgit terus melemah, yang mana ianya lebih menjurus kepada perubahan seperti yang kita lihat adalah kebanyakannya disebabkan perubahan-perubahan yang berlaku di luar negara, khususnya melibatkan keputusan-keputusan yang dibuat oleh bank-bank pusat di negara ataupun di ekonomi-ekonomi utama. Jadi saya kira dari segi pergerakan mata wang secara tidak langsung bagi ekonomi juga, sebenarnya kelemahan nilai ringgit sepatutnya memberi satu kekuatan ataupun tarikan bagi sektor ekspor. Cuma kita lihat dari segi suasana keadaan ekonomi dunia sekarang ini tampak lebih perlahan. Jadi saya kira mungkin akan mengambil sedikit masa untuk melihat kesan positif daripada kelemahan nilai ringgit ini bagi menyokong pertumbuhan ekspor negara.
Okay, baik Muiz, itu adalah kita melihat daripada aspek kadar monetary, dan kita nak pergi kepada rakyat. Dengan runutan orang ramai komplain pasal kos sara hidup mereka yang semakin naik, ini sudah tentu ia akan membuatkan orang lagi berasa susah. Adakah Muiz menjangkakan perubahan? Kita bercakap mengenai arah subsidi bersasar yang akan tetap dibuat oleh kerajaan. Bagaimana kita tahu apabila subsidi bersasar ini dilaksanakan, mungkin akan memberi iaitu tekanan kepada inflasi atau menjejaskan inflasi dalam negara. Bagaimana untuk kita lihat iaitu subsidi bersasar ini? Kita tahu kerajaan dalam bertujuan agenda dia untuk membantu, untuk memberi bantuan kepada golongan yang betul-betul memerlukan dan untuk mengawal perbelanjaan negara di samping itu. Tetapi kita dapat kesan sampingannya ini akan memberi tekanan kepada inflasi. Jadi mungkin Muiz boleh kongsikan bagaimana untuk kita mengimbangkan perkara ini. Bagaimana untuk kita lihat balancing act daripada perkara ini?
Okey, sebenarnya kalau kita lihat fenomena inflasi yang berlaku sekarang ni adalah satu fenomena global, kerana kita dapati kebanyakan negara juga mengalami tekanan inflasi. Oleh sebab itu, bila kita lihat dari segi keputusan yang dibuat bank-bank pusat dunia, kita juga dapati terdapat keputusan secara kasarnya bank-bank pusat kebanyakannya menaikkan kadar faedah bagi mengekang tekanan harga, khususnya daripada pertumbuhan ekonomi yang kuatlah. Dan kita dapati dari segi pihak kerajaan pula, apa yang tindakan yang diambil ialah pemberian subsidi adalah bertujuan untuk turut sama mengekang daripada kenaikan harga global yang akhirnya menyebabkan kenaikan inflasi dalam negara. Tapi bila kita lihat dari segi pemberian subsidi ini, ianya memberi tekanan kepada kedudukan fiskal kerajaan yang sebelum ini telah pun melemah disebabkan ransangan dan juga perbelanjaan yang dibuat oleh kerajaan bagi menyokong ekonomi negara sewaktu pandemik. Dan ianya adalah satu kebiasaan bila kita lihat kedudukan ekonomi bertambah baik, kita dapati aktiviti semakin memulih dan ransangan yang diberikan ini perlu dikurangkan kerana kerajaan perlu juga kembali fokus kepada memperbaiki kedudukan fiskal. Oleh sebab itu, ianya jelas kenapa kerajaan berniat untuk memperkenalkan inisiatif subsidi bersasar. Cuma dari segi timing saya rasa agak sukar bagi kerajaan kerana kita masih menghadapi tekanan inflasi secara global dan mungkin kita akan dapati keputusan ini perlu dibuat dengan lebih cermat bagi memperbaiki kedudukan ekonomi.
Hari itu kita dah baru-baru ni kita Malaysia naik nak tangga 5, nak tangga daripada 32 tahun lepas hingga tangga ke-27 dalam daya saing global. Ini menunjukkan bahawa Malaysia mempunyai daya tahan iaitu daya saing yang kuat dalam menempuh apa jua keadaan terutama dalam krisis ini. Mungkin Muiz boleh kongsikan dalam seminit saja kami tinggal, adakah daripada WCR iaitu daya saing global yang mengiktirafkan iaitu seluruh usaha kerajaan telah berkesan, adakah inflasi mungkin akan kekal ataupun turun sedikit?
Secara kasar kita dapati inflasi mungkin akan lebih menurun kerana kita lihat seperti saya katakan kedudukan komoditi itu mungkin menjadi punca ataupun kalau kita lihat juga dari segi harga pengeluar juga turut menunjukkan penurunan kos pengeluaran. Okay. Jadi kita dapati tiada tekanan untuk kena inflasi terus menaik dan kekuatan yang diiktiraf dari segi daya saing Malaysia juga menunjukkan Malaysia mampu untuk mengekalkan kestabilan ekonomi negara dalam tempoh akan datang.
Baik, saya nak ucapkan terima kasih kepada Abdul Muiz Murhalim merupakan pakar ekonomi MIDF Research. Saudara tentu walaupun apa jua iaitu angka baru inflasi ataupun IHP hari ini sudah tentu kita sebagai rakyat Malaysia kita sudah bersedia dengan daya saing kita pun semakin meningkat pada tahun ini dan semuanya akan kami rangkumkan dalam astrawani.com dan semua platform digital Astrawani.
Stres juga kan? Bila nak stream tengok movie atau bola kat rumah, internet tak kencang, lagging sana sini. Sebab itulah setiap rumah perlukan router Wi-Fi 6 Astro Fiber. Walaupun lebih 10 peranti bawah satu bumbung, router Wi-Fi 6 Astro Fiber ni sangat powerful. Router Wi-Fi 6 ni 3 kali lebih kencang daripada Wi-Fi 5. Tadi kita cakap pasal bola kan? Gol! Liga Malaysia sekarang ada dekat Astro. Ada satu bandel jimat. 50 Mbps fiber dengan Astro dan Liga Malaysia hanya RM149.99 saja sebulan. Tawaran ini terhad tau. Dapatkan sekarang sebelum direbut orang. WhatsApp nombor ni sekarang.
Assalamualaikum, salam hormat. Anda bersama saya Haris Ashraf Hasnan dan sudah tentu untuk waktu ini kita nak memberi fokus kepada apa yang berlangsung di dalam AVPN Global Conference 2023 yang berlangsung serentak juga bersama dengan The Hasanah Forum 2023 yang sudah tentu ini merupakan platform yang menghimpunkan pelbagai pihak. Seluruh ekosistem sebenarnya penting terutamanya dalam pembangunan perniagaan social enterprise terutamanya yang dalam kita temu bual beberapa siri di dalam niaga Awani. Jadi saya berbesar hati hari ini bersama dengan saya adalah Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif KWSP Datuk Seri Amir Hamzah Azizan. Datuk Seri, terima kasih sudi bersama dengan Astro Awani. Datuk Seri ada slot di dalam forum Hasanah ini. Mungkin boleh kongsikan apa key takeaways lah antara fokus utama Datuk Seri dalam forum kali ini. Ya.
Terima kasih Haris. Hari ini saya dijemput untuk datang conference ni untuk bercakap sikitlah tentang energy transition. Macam mana kita nak menolong untuk accelerate pace yang energy transition yang akan berlaku kerana macam mana pun di seluruh negara dunia kita terpaksa berganjak untuk mengurangkan impak yang kita ada kepada climate. Ya. Kalau ini tak akan berlaku, masalah yang kita nampak sekarang di dalam iklim yang tidak menentu, ya, kenaikan haba yang lebih tinggi akan menjadi lebih terburuk lagi. Jadi kita kena mula dan macam mana institusi seperti EPF boleh menolong untuk merancangkan lagi pengancakan ni.
Ya. Mungkin dalam bentuk perancangan di peringkat EPF sendiri dari segi energy transition ini bagaimana perancangannya? Ya.
Kalau kita tengok daripada segi EPF seperti semua orang sedia maklum adalah satu institusi pension fund yang menolong ahlinya untuk membina simpanan yang cukup di masa lama. Jadi daripada caruman yang kita dapat, kita melabur dalam banyak-banyak institusi portfolio kita agar dapat pulangan yang lebih elok. Tapi cara kita melabur adalah satu benda yang penting untuk menolong dalam perganjakan yang kita adakan ni. Tahun lalu kita telah mengenalkan kita punya Sustainable Investment Policy untuk menerangkan kepada semua institusi yang ingin EPF melabur ni, apakah pendirian EPF kepada climate change. Dan kita berkata sampai 2030 kita fokus untuk ke semua portfolio EPF mesti ESG compliant portfolio. Ini bermakna dia semua embrace the concept of menolong EPF menjaga untuk mencapai ESG compliant. Sampai tahun 2050 kita akan mencapai climate carbon neutrality. Jadi bila kita roll out ni Sustainable Investment Policy itu, kita menerangkan kepada semua orang apakah plan-plan EPF dan apakah EPF akan buat untuk menolong institusi itu berganjak kepada jalan yang sama.
Ya. Kalau kita nampak yang hadir dalam Khazanah Forum ini sudah tentu banyaknya melibatkan social enterprise dan juga pada masa sama yang saya ada temu bual adalah sebagai contoh Ganesh dari yang mengusahakan teknologi solar untuk pembersihan air di kawasan perkampungan orang asli di kawasan pedalaman. Itu merupakan satu contoh. Moving forward menuju ke hadapan, dokongan daripada entiti seperti EPF, KWSP sendiri kepada social enterprise sebagai contoh, kerana contoh startup social enterprise ini perjalanannya itu tidak mudah, kadang-kadang kala memerlukan sokongan yang menyeluruh ekosistem itu. Pandangan Datuk Seri?
Seperti kita faham, EPF ni adalah untuk menolong ahli untuk menyimpan agar simpanan yang cukup.
Ya.
Jadi matlamat kita yang pertama adalah menjaga yang simpanannya selamatlah dengan pulangan yang elok. Jadi kalau kita tengok daripada kita punya strategic asset allocation mechanism, kita dah mula ada ruang sikit untuk invest earlier stage of investment. Macam 2 tahun lalu kita mengenalkan growth PE fund. Jadi dari growth PE fund ni kita boleh invest dalam business yang mungkin masa tu belum sampai tahap keuntungan, tapi dia punya business model dah mula menunjukkan kestabilan. Tapi dia nak sokongan sikit kewangan agar dia boleh berkembang lebih elok. Kita berharap dengan merancangkan zaman ni, kita boleh create unicorn yang boleh pertama memberi pulangan yang elok kepada EPF. Yang kedua juga dapat merancangkan juga bursa di dalam tu.
Datuk Seri optimis Malaysia mampu melahirkan unicorn, kerana kalau kita lihat perjalanan contoh nak melahirkan unicorn itu daripada startup nak sampai ke unicorn itu selalunya permasalahannya sebelum di tengah-tengah lah, maksudnya di tengah-tengah sebelum nak IPO apa semua tu, di tengah-tengah dari segi dana terutamanya. Datuk Seri optimis Malaysia mampu melahirkan?
Saya percaya kita boleh. Kalau kita tengok daripada segi dana mula, VC, venture capital, Malaysia memang ada banyak dana-dana yang telah dibuat untuk menolong bisnes-bisnes mula startup. Tapi bila dia sampai ke pertengahan jalan, seperti dia katakan, tiba-tiba duitnya tak ada.
Duitnya tak ada. Siapa nak minta tolong ni?
Jadi bila kita mewujudkan kita punya early growth PE fund, kita allocate certain amount capital untuk melabur dalam company-company. Company-company mungkin kecil masa tu. Tapi yang penting untuk EPF, kita faham business model dia. Kita nampak yang business model dia sampai zaman kestabilan. Dan kalau kita boleh menolong masa tu, dia akan dapat grow dengan better dan lead to the potential untuk dia jadi listing ke, strategic acquisition untuk orang lain ke, dan sampai ke tahap yang lain. Tapi untuk membuat ni, kita pun faham. Dan mungkin ni adalah area yang baru untuk EPF. Kerana ni area baru, mungkin kita tak boleh buat sendiri. Jadi kita mengajak beberapa GP kita di luar negara untuk menolong kita dalam journey kita dalam ni. Jadi mereka ada pengalaman, dia ada expertise untuk menolong company-company untuk identify company ni. Jadi dengan partnership yang kita ada, lebih elok lagi, lebih senang lagi, lebih selamat lagi simpanan yang kita buat.
Okey. Sebenarnya banyak lagi nak dibualkan dengan Datuk Seri. Mungkin pada masa-masa akan datang kita akan terus bersama dengan Datuk Seri Amir Hamzah Azizan. Terima kasih Datuk Seri, Ketua Pegawai Eksekutif Kumpulan Wang Simpanan Pekerja KWSP, berkongsi pandangan apa yang berlangsung seiring dengan The Hasanah Forum sepanjang 3 hari di KL Convention Center ini. Baik, sudah tentu banyak lagi laporan menarik akan kami bawakan. Teruskan setia bersama dengan Astro Awani dan semuanya kami rangkumkan di astroawani.com dan semua platform digital Astro Awani. Assalamualaikum, salam hormat.
Welcome home, my son. Kepulangan yang ditunggu-tunggu.
Anak Omar dah balik ya.
Tapi trauma menghantui. Bermulalah realiti berhadapan dengan 1001 cabaran.
Aku rasa dia benci kat aku ya.
Dia sama je lah macam mama kau. Dia pun perempuan.
Diorang ni lain macam sikit. Haluan dia lain. Haluan.
We got here gossip about you too, you know.
Apa kau mengepek? Ni ya, orang handsome macam kita orang. Ini biasa orang suka fitnah.
Masalah dia ni sebenarnya.
Cinta Wrong Direction. Mulai 26 Jun di Astro dan Astro Go.
Bersediakah anda untuk aksi terhebat di sepak takraw League? Saksikan jago terunggul negara dengan lebih dekat setiap Jumaat, Sabtu dan Ahad. Sokongan anda menyemarakkan lagi semangat mereka. Ini milik kita.
Hello and welcome to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kauschi. Niaga Spotlight goes through the week in business and future affairs, market watch, industries, analysis and insights. We've got you covered on Niaga Spotlight. Well, for today's analysis, we'll be looking at personal data breaches, which are a regular occurrence in Malaysia, accompanied by heavy privacy impacts and economic costs. In fact, Communications and Digital Minister Fahmi Fadzil acknowledged this week the necessity for amending the Personal Data Protection Act, PDPA 2010, by next year to prevent personal data from being stolen and used in fraud. FYI, in 2022 alone, there were several major data breaches involving high-profile companies and government agencies. One of the biggest data breaches in Malaysia last year was when the personal details of 22 million Malaysians, allegedly from the National Registration Department, NRD, were leaked and sold online. An MCMC report also found a website listing personal data of 3.5 million Astro subscribers, 1.8 million Maybank accounts and 7.2 million users. Further, Cybersecurity Malaysia CSM records show 19 cases of personal data breaches in 2020, 28 in 2021 and 50 cases in 2022, while from January to February alone this year, a total of 49 cases were recorded. 7 of these cases have been charged in court under Section 5 Act 709 with total compounds amounting to 200,000 ringgit and 8 cases under Section 16 with compounds totaling 81,000 ringgit. Taking all of this into account, today we focus on the importance of Malaysia's personal data protection being more comprehensive. This in accordance with data protection as integral to not just human rights, but also looking towards regional and international standards such as Singapore's model and the EU's General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR. Munira Mustafa, founder and executive director of Shosho Group, joins us online now to discuss personal data protection. Good morning, Munira. Thank you so much for joining me on Niaga Spotlight.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me.
Munira, I'd like to begin by asking you, what can Malaysia learn from Singapore regarding data protection policies and regulations, especially considering the recent January 2023 MOU signed between Singapore and Malaysia? This was, of course, on cooperation in personal data protection, cybersecurity, and digital economy. Your thoughts on this?
Right. What I can understand from the MOU cooperation between Malaysia and Singapore is that it involves the exchange of knowledge and best practices, educational capacity building programs, enforcement efforts and mechanisms to promote cross-border data flows. So what we can learn from Singapore is that the Personal Data Protection Act, the PDPA, which offers a pragmatic approach to data protection. It applies universally to private sector organizations, and it involves maintaining consistency in data protection standards. So the law, it mandates that the appointment of a data protection officer within each organization, and that allows certain data processing activities without explicit consent under specific circumstances, and it provides clear guidelines for data breach management and enforces strict penalties for non-compliance up to $1 million.
That's very interesting. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, Munira, and setting the scene for the rest of the conversation. Now, of course, development and implementation of even the ASEAN cross-border data flow mechanism under the ASEAN framework on digital data governance, these could also be some things and issues which could come up because the MOU is actually valid for 5 years till January 2026. So moving along from there, Munira, let's talk a little bit about what are some proactive steps then which can be taken by all organizations in Malaysia that process data to update their existing data processing policies, their systems, their procedures, their processes. It's not enough, of course, to just be committed to cybersecurity. We need to see the actions happen and happen fast, right?
Yes. So the 5 years, there's a reason for that 5-year limit. Organizations can enhance the data processing policies by frequently updating their data protection policies. And again, as I mentioned, that they need to appoint a data protection officer and manage consent effectively and conduct regular data mapping. And that's why you have to have that 5-year cycle, because this requires reviews and renewal consistently. Apart from that, implementing data minimization and robust measures, conducting staff training on data protection, integrating privacy by design and process, formulating a breach management plan, and carrying out regular audits are also necessary proactive steps.
Thank you. Thanks very much for that. And of course, within all of this, communicating this to customers, to users on a consistent basis, because I think with all the data breaches that have been happening, especially over the pandemics, increased access and use to everything internet, what we have been seeing is a lot of exhaustion around data privacy itself. Most Malaysian consumers have taken a little bit of a how do we begin caring, and should we even care anymore? Moving along, Munira, data privacy laws in Malaysia do face enormous problems with implementation, as you've already alluded to. And despite increasing allocations to improve cybersecurity data of Malaysians, we continue to experience some of the worst data breaches in the region. So do you feel increasing fines is an approach that will work to address the issue? Bearing in mind, of course, that neither NRD nor private sector offenders like IP88 have been fined. And what we have available under legislative grievances right now is 300,000 ringgit or 2 years in jail, or both if found guilty. But nobody has actually been charged for this insofar.
Right. So increasing fines, it could work as a potential deterrent for data breaches, but it's not a complete solution. While heavy penalties can provide an incentive for companies to enhance their cybersecurity measures, that's not going to address the root cause. And this requires a comprehensive approach that includes fostering a strong culture of compliance within organizations, increasing awareness about the importance of data privacy among the general public and employees, and encouraging proactive measures like regular audits and data mapping. And additionally, the legal framework itself should be regularly updated to keep up with the evolving technological landscape and associated risks, because they're going to keep changing. So a holistic approach that includes improved enforcement, regular audits, and increased accountability across government agencies and private sector entities are necessary.
Absolutely. Regular audits and, of course, increasing accountability, particularly when it comes to especially government-related offences that are potential. Moving along to a last discussion area, Munira, what will it take to get Malaysia's infrastructure and data security right, especially looking at how international companies like AWS are planning to invest up to 25.5 billion ringgit in Malaysia by 2037 for their cloud computing infrastructures?
Right. To improve Malaysia's data security, it's going to require a strengthened legal framework that aligns with international standards like the European General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, or Singapore's PDPA. and a significant investment in robust digital infrastructure, and enhancing technical skills in cybersecurity through capacity building. We also should look into fostering public-private partnerships that can leverage technical expertise, enforce regulatory compliance, promote a robust culture of cybersecurity and OPSEC, and engage international cooperation for sharing best practices and threat intelligence.
Thank you. Thank you for that overview, Munira. And if I could ask you on one final area, in your view, if all of this were to be done holistically, how long, and is there a specific time frame we can expect to attach to it if all of this should happen cohesively?
We should have been starting like yesterday, literally yesterday. And because this is a process that's going to be taking years, but that's okay because things change rapidly, and the best thing we can do is just hit the ground running.
Yeah, absolutely. Speaking about hitting the ground running, though, as we have a little more time left available, when you speak about data security, what are some of the most prominent issues that have cropped up to you, particularly in relation to not just the fact that we're looking at personal data being leaked for usage by nefarious parties, but at the same time looking at the wider ecosystem of information, particularly in upcoming election cycles, for example?
So there's data leaks can involve micro-targeting, and that's going to involve the threat actors knowing what exactly how to tailor their approach and target consumers and audiences like us. I think the current concern is mainly about the loss of finance, which is why the LHDN scam is so pervasive, because people still fall for that, even though they shouldn't believe that when they pick up the phone, they should believe that the person speaking to them is from an LHDN. I think this is an issue that could be improved by improving the information environment themselves, because information and understanding of government processes should be improved so that people, the public, should understand the very basic fact that an LHDN officer would never approach them via the telephone, because it only involves written communication and approach. So that's a very small approach to try and address a problem, but moving on from it's going to involve a very comprehensive overhaul of the entire information system.
Yes, absolutely. I think you've observed it very accurately, that it looks at overhauling the entire information ecosystem. And one last point that I would like for you to leave us with, Munira, when it comes to improving personal data protection, could you reiterate what would be the 1 to 3 major areas that need to be acted upon immediately? As you said yesterday, but let's just re-emphasize them.
Sorry, could you repeat that? I couldn't hear it.
Sure. I was asking what would be the first 1 or 2 things which we need to operationalize in order to get our personal data protection ecosystem right. And as you said, it ought to have been yesterday.
Right. That would involve improving awareness. The public has to understand what are their responsibilities on their own data. That's one. But ultimately, it's the data custodian that have to improve their own security and management of the database themselves. And this has been raised several times before, because it seems that a lot of the onus and the burden are being placed on the end users. However, when you look back at a lot of the leakages that has happened, that seems to be coming from the custodians themselves. So I'm not sure what we're doing to actually call into question why the breaches are happening and what is being done about it. But I'm saying that this is something that should require a closer look.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Munira, for your time. So that, of course, was Munira Mustafa, founder and executive director of Astro Group, giving us a well-rounded perspective of legal, technical and organizational measures, capacity development and cooperation required for ensuring personal data protection for Malaysia. We take a quick break now. Stay with us as we come right back with Niaga Spotlight.
Tapi dalam masa sama, rakyat akan dapat merasa semua limpahannya.
Seharusnya, sepantasnya menggunakan all this kemudahan teknologi ini.
Sekurang-kurangnya diploma.
Kita memerlukan guru-guru yang berkualiti. Itu perkara yang paling asas dalam sistem pendidikan.
Bagaimana nak mengubah persepsi mereka yang menggunakan web?
Kita tidak bercakap berdasarkan testimoni semata-mata.
Agenda Awani setiap hari di Astro Awani dan Astro Go.
Tiada lagi ruang kompromi.
Ini dah minggu yang keberapa kan? We lose that moment.
Kesilapan yang memusnahkan impian.
Kena ada wow factor.
This is the real you. Be a strong singer.
Siapa yang bakal mendominasi pentas BBNU? Big Stage, siaran langsung Ahad 9 malam di Astro Ria dan Astro Go.
An adventure. Everywhere I go, people ask me the same thing. Can you take a picture with my dog? I literally saved the world.
How is that for you, Scott? You should write a book about it.
Where are we? It's like we're camping. We love camping.
We've never been camping.
We're gonna go home.
You ready?
Ant-Man and the Wasp, Quantum Mania. Stream sekarang di Astro Box Baharu.
Welcome back to Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kausji. On today's Future Affairs, we take a closer look at global minimum tax. Now, GMT, or global minimum tax, is a once-in-a-lifetime global tax reform meant to end tax competition and profit shifting by Q4 of 2023. It is aimed at ensuring that multinational companies, MNCs, pay the right amount of taxes, that is at 15%, regardless of where they operate. The 15% minimum will lead to some companies reconsidering where they locate their business activity. With tax incentives potentially taken out of the picture, many companies will instead reassess the business environment in the jurisdictions where they operate, including Malaysia. This will include looking at whether they can get access to the right talent, whether operating environment is attractive, are cash grants, other types of incentives available, is land affordable, and so on. Now, overall, while Malaysia is not a member of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, OECD, it is a member of the OECD's inclusive framework. Hence, there is an expectation that it will thus support and implement GMT. Tan Hui Beng, International Tax Leader with Deloitte Malaysia and Southeast Asia, joins me live in the studios now to further discuss the big picture of global minimum tax for Malaysia. Hui Beng, thank you so much for making time for us. How are you today?
Good, and thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Hui Beng, let's get started off with you perhaps sharing with us what is the current status of Malaysia's roadmap for GMT, considering that the time frame is short and Malaysia will also need to amend its domestic tax legislation to implement OECD's very ambitious targets for the rollout.
Thanks, Tamina. So, the original plan by OECD was to really get it done in 2023, but it was obviously overly ambitious. So many countries have moved on to do it in 2024. For example, European Union, Korea, Japan, and many more countries. So for Malaysia, the question is really not whether Malaysia will do it. Malaysia will have to do it. The real question is when, right?
That's right.
2024 versus 2025. I think the latest will be 2025. The real question here is, will it happen in 2024? Last year, 6 October 2022, I think under the previous government, the Minister of Finance then did announce that Malaysia will introduce global minimum tax and the qualified domestic minimum top-up tax, the QDMTT, in 2024. But of course, since then, there's a change of government. And of course,
that's right.
On 24th February 2023 this year, the budget was retabled. And, in some of the documents in the budget touchpoint, it was mentioned that, QDMTT and GMT will be introduced. So based on the direction of travel right now, it appears that 2024 is possible. But we really have to wait for a firmer announcement by the government. But I feel that 2024 may be the start year for Malaysia, yeah?
All right. And it's also very interesting, Hui Beng, that you mentioned about the retabling of the budget, etc. But also last week, Deputy Finance Minister Ahmad Maslan did mention that GMT would likely be tabled in Dewan Rakyat by later this year. So would that happening, would that operationalize, and would that be a further emphasization of the fact that 2024 will be the year?
It seems to be, if it's going to be tabled before the budget sometime October, and probably, 2024 will be a start year. So maybe let me just emphasize on one point. When we say 2024, right, let's assume Malaysia does introduce in 2024, it means for any companies or group that having a year-end beginning on or after 1st January 2024, that will be the first, those will be affected by the 2024 year, right? So
their first fiscal year.
Yes, correct, absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. And another point that I would love for you to perhaps clarify for us, given your expertise, Hui Bang. Now, the country might gain about R1 billion in tax revenue for a start when GMT is introduced, yet Malaysia's current corporate tax rate of 24% is higher than the proposed GMT of 15%. Will standardization, in your viewpoint, actually lead to increased tax revenue?
Now, when the Malaysian government did mention about potentially collecting about 1 billion, right, ringgit Malaysia for under the GMT for the first year if we introduce, let's say in 2024, is a situation where multinationals having a foreign headquarters, let's say in UK, having a Malaysian subsidiaries in Penang, for example, right, Malaysian subsidiaries and enjoying certain tax holiday. Therefore, the effective tax rate will go down below 15%, right? And that's where the top-up tax under the QDMTT will take place. And I think that 1 billion is from that. Now, Malaysia does not need to decrease the tax rate to 15% for sure. But the QDMT, the introduction of QDMT will ensure that Malaysia will be able to collect the top-up tax rather than allowing the government of the foreign parent to collect the top-up tax. So the QDMT is quite crucial, right? Yeah.
There you go. Wonderful. Thank you very much for clarifying that. Very important point. Now, moving along, Hui Bang, looking at two impacted categories of MNCs, which are the large Malaysian-based MNCs that have foreign operations and also foreign-based MNCs that have operations in Malaysia. How will the OECD GMT of 15% affect their operational costs, which may also be related to perhaps an anticipated outflow of them rather than continuing to stay on in Malaysia?
Yes. So as you have aptly mentioned, there are two types, outbound and inbound, right? Now, the fact is that what are the costs to them? Now, although the GMT has been set at 15%, it doesn't mean there will be necessarily be a top-up tax for multinationals group, because if you're operating in Malaysia at a normal tax rate 24%, that's unlikely to be a top-up tax. If you're you're operating in Thailand at 20%, unlikely that's going to be a top-up tax unless you enjoy certain incentive, right? So top-up tax may or may not happen. That's one thing, right? Of course, it happens. It's an additional business cost. But equally important is, I just want to emphasize the one point, even though if you operate in a country where there's no top-up tax to 15% because your effective tax rate is already 15% or above that, there is a huge, massive compliance obligation. And that means you need more people, you need to automate your system, you need to have more resources expend on this thing. Now that is actually costly, right? So the cost comes from potential top-up tax as well as the cost in managing the compliance. Right? Yeah.
Indeed. So I think that's very important about that when it comes to also the fact that the income inclusion rule, IRR being the main rule, is to be rolled out first, with the backup rule, the undertax payments rule, UTPR, targeted to be implemented the following year.
Yes.
Would you say that the investments required for the vast landscape that you just mentioned should already be in place in time for the IIR, or can it be done in a staggered manner?
Right. So when one's prepared for GMT, you got to look at it holistically, and when you prepare for GMT, you're going to prepare yourself for IRR, UTPR, and also the one thing that it needs to be emphasized is the QDMTT. Why I said that? Because in the rule order, if there is a top-up tax, the QDMTT is the one that is going to operate and pick up the tax. I'll give you a very important example.
Sure.
A US-based multinationals having a Malaysian subsidiaries. Again, the same example, enjoying tax holiday, 20 years pioneer status. Therefore, Malaysian effective tax rate is going to be probably 0%. Now, there's going to be a top-up tax to 15%, right? The question is, who collects the 15%? Malaysian government will collect 15% if Malaysia introduces QDMTT, which Malaysia would. But assuming if Malaysia does not introduce QDMTT, that 15%, the money that is on the table will go to the government of the US, for example, right? So obviously, all governments in the world are likely to introduce QDMTT. So when you prepare for when a group prepares for GMT is preparing for everything, for QDMTT, for IRR, UTP, so on and so on. So it's all in one package, right? Yeah.
All right, brilliant. Really well put. Now, of course, GMT will only apply to MNCs operating in at least 2 jurisdictions. They also require an annual consolidated group revenue of at least 750 million euro, which amounts to about 3.5 billion. So definitely not something to sneeze at. And I think we can definitely anticipate that this will be rolled out by the associated bodies. So moving along to the qualified domestic minimum top-up tax, the QMDT, which is part and parcel of GMT, do you feel that similar to how Hong Kong and Singapore, we would be rolling that out? And have you seen the frameworks emerging, at least for the relevant MNCs in Malaysia already?
Right. So you're right. Singapore have decided to do the QDMTT in 2025, although many other countries are doing in 2024, and likewise Hong Kong. And the reason Hong Kong is doing in 2025, basically they are just emulating Singapore because they are competitors in that sense.
That's right.
And the question is...
Financial hubs.
Absolutely. And therefore the question from Malaysia is, do we follow them or do we go ahead to do in 2024? I think that is a question of policy, and the question that government have to ask, whether we give a bit more time to foreign direct investment to adjust himself to 2025, or we are risking, Malaysia is risking itself from losing a revenue if it doesn't do it in 2024. And I think the Deputy Finance Minister mentioned about 1 billion ringgit, the potential loss. So that's just balancing act here, right?
Mm-hmm.
But at the end of the day, it will come. It's a matter of time. Right?
That's right, exactly. So it all depends on what the powers that be, especially legislatively, decide what is best for the country moving forth.
Right.
Very important, considering this has been quite the bonanza year for FDIs. Yes. Moving the conversation along, Hui Beng. Now, how can the two categories of MNCs mentioned earlier start preparing for effective and also efficient implementation of either GMT or QSMNT?
Right. So assuming Malaysia does that in 2024, and let's assume that group have a December year end. So your first affected financial year will be 1st Jan 2024 to 31st December 2024, right? So what do they need to do right now? Indeed, they should be doing this yesterday, not today. It has to do in a robust way. They have to do an impact assessment to look at whether there's a top-up tax or not. If there's a top-up tax, what is the implication, financial burden? Is it going to impact dividend payout? Cash mobilization, for example. That's on impact assessment. And then in the countries that you're operating where you have tax holiday, whether you need to renegotiate the incentive, whether you need to see the investment agency. I think you can't just be sitting down and say, okay, it is what it is, right? You got to see if you are having a tax holiday, what do we need to do with the tax holiday? Because the tax holiday could be a little bit less relevant with GMT, right? So then moving on, we got to look at the compliance, we look at data readiness, make sure your data is good enough to produce the GMT computation, whether we need to have an automation, or we can do as business as usual manual calculation, which is impossible to do that. There is going to be a
the volume
error.
of data.
Absolutely,
yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So all this needs to be done. And one important word I have to highlight, especially for the CFO.
Sure.
This GMT thing, with the amendment to International Accounting Standard number 12 in terms of income tax. Just for example, the Malaysian listed group, for example, that's having a December year end, their first major financial disclosure under IS12 is not actually in 2024, it's by end of this year, 31st December 2023, end of this year. That's one financial disclosure that you need to talk about your preparedness towards GMT, your potential impact. And you can imagine if you don't do the impact assessment, how would you be able to do the proper disclosure? Of course, there's one option for a company to say that they could have a statement to say that, well, we are still assessing it, but look, the stakeholder, the investor will not be happy with that kind of disclosure because
naturally, because this is hot news on the market,
right? That simple disclosure will only mean the CFO has not done his or her job, right? Obviously, you want to elect for that kind of disclosure, you want to have a more robust disclosure, and the stakeholder will be happy with it.
Yeah, absolutely fair, considering that, as you said, the clock is ticking faster than ever, especially for our listed companies.
Yeah.
Right. Moving along from there now. So, of course, as you just mentioned, so one of the major considerations is configuring the accounting system for generating the volume of data required for GMT, followed by, of course, a trial run to ensure all systems are go. Can you break down what this looks like when operationalized, getting down to the nitty-gritty, Hui Beng?
Right. So, well, the law is there. But automation is not mandatory, obviously, but from practical aspect, probably one have to do that. The reason is simple, is because if you are operating in many countries, and in that particular countries, in the foreign countries, or even Malaysia, we have many companies, right? So the data has to be consistent. There are a lot of data points, more than 100 data points where you need to look at to generate the data. Therefore, you really got to make sure you do a proper mapping, and the accounting system needs to be modified. So multinationals have two choices, right? Number one, the existing accounting system, they try to modify, to cater for GMT. Or the other option is to really look at what is available in the market, the GMT calculation engine you probably buy from the vendor, and then you try to integrate your existing accounting system to generate the data. But the way I look at it, for most Malaysian-based multinationals, probably you have to opt for the later, because to modify your accounting system is not easy, right? So all these will be essential and has to be done in no time. Yeah. In no time. And cost efficiency wise as well, just for discussion's sake, is it the first option or the latter option? I think all factors considered. Yeah, I think it depends on the merits of each case. But I think from practical aspect, the later option probably will be more sustainable, and you at least can rely on the vendor to update whatever needs to be done, right? But if you have a huge IT team, competent IT team, then of course modifying your own accounting system is also a big possibility, right? Absolutely. Yeah. All right, so as we move towards summarizing, so what are the full impacts of GMT and how should affected MNCs move forward in your perspective? Okay, so again, look at the two categories, very important. The inbound situation, if you're having a tax holiday, you probably need to see the Malaysian Investment Agency to see what could be done. If there's a top-up tax, you've got to live with that. But in that area, I'm very confident and I'm very sure the Malaysian government, together all the investment agency, are really looking at the ecosystem, not looking only on tax incentive, because with GMT tax incentive may be less relevant, still good, but less relevant, less effective. So Malaysia's government will be really looking at other non-fiscal factors. Supply of labor, rule of law, intellectual property protection, so on and so forth. The non-fiscal factor will become a very important factor to attract and maintain the FDI in Malaysia. That's for the inbound case. For the outbound case, the Malaysian listed co, they have to assess their situations overseas, whether they need to see the investment agency in Singapore, the EDB, or elsewhere, doing the same thing, right? But all in all, I want to say this. To those who think that GMT will not come in and they're praying hard that it will just vanish in the thin air, it will not happen. I think it's imminent. So GMT waits for no man. We have to brace ourselves for these new forms of taxation, which is the largest tax reform in the history, actually. So we got to brace for that. Absolutely, once in a lifetime, as you said. Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Hui Beng. Excellent discussion and conversation. And that was, of course, super insightful. And appreciate making time on Niaga Spotlight. That's all we do have time for on the week for Niaga Spotlight with me, Tamina Kowski. We'll see you next Friday with more business analysis and insights. Here's to a productive week ahead.
Mata mainkan peranan yang paling besar.
Adik menyuruh.
Air mata saya ni on command.